the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Authentic Audio Productions, providing full-service solutions for you and your podcast. Custom content creation, hosting, professional tools, everything you need to get from A to Z with your podcast. Visit AuthenticAudioPro.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, November 11th. Happy Veterans Day. Thanks to all those who have served and are serving. Little NFL, little Major League Baseball on the back end today. It's officially past the halfway point, at least in terms of how our calendar works, which means I'm starting to put 2024 in the rearview mirror already. I'm starting to look ahead to December, January, February, March, which of course means some off-season stuff, and we're going positionally here. So today is going to be, because I think it's maybe as relevant as it's been in a couple of seasons here, we're going to talk valuations for pending or notable running back contracts. So this would be free agents or players that I think are at least trending in the right direction for some sort of discussion with the contract extension with their current team. It's a good list. It's a deep list. It's not a list of great players who are going to hit the open market and never get paid. I actually think we're in a pretty good spot right now, right? The Barkley stuff, David Montgomery stuff, the Chuba Hubbard stuff, even to some degree, Kamara getting a re-up, even though it was just a cash re-up in New Orleans. There's signs percolating, right? That things are starting to improve. And by the way, they're showing themselves on the field as well in terms of balancing out some of these offenses. And I think putting their foot down to say, look, damn it, we're not $5 million players. If the cap's going to be 270, we have to be a 10 million plus position. And I think I've got a couple examples of that here to get to. So we'll start with that. Dan Soemann joins in the back end here because we've got an international prospect that has posted. And unfortunately, it's not going to be the Yamamoto discussion. Dan's going to explain why and bring some numbers along with that. And obviously some teams that are going to be swinging big for this potential next ace of a rotation. And then some arbitration stuff because the Super 2 number was announced, which means we kind of have some finalizations in terms of where things are headed for arbitration. There's dozens of players arbitration eligible. We've yet to see anybody avoid, extend, things like that. It's still pretty early here. We're about 1 week now fully in to this Major League Baseball offseason. We do have a couple of small signings. We do have a couple of trades that we made note of last week. But for the most part, it's been radio silent. And by the way, it's probably going to be until some of the big chips fall, right? Like the Soto stuff is going to be what it is. You're probably down to 4 to 5 teams already. My guess is Boris has already done some phone work with some of the fringier teams and said, this is where the big boys are at. And my guess is, some of those teams have already hung up the phone and gone on to plan B, but we'll see. There's plenty of other options here in terms of Pete Alonso and Corbin Burns and potentially some of these names that we got to last week on our list. But I guess is the big fish have to fall. Teams have to get into plan B mode, and then we'll start to see some real action with both the arbitration process and the free agent stuff as well. So obviously keeping a close eye on all of that. And Dan will join in just a few minutes to break down some of the more interesting news that came up last week, and that is going to really impact some teams going forward here. All right, let's get to some running backs. Barkley, good contract, good performance thus far. Jonathan Taylor, good contract. For the most part, good performance. Still kind of showing he's going to be a part-time player, unfortunately. There's some names here, and I have to go positive and negative, right? So I'll lead with the negative. We started off this year, and this was the guy. This was the guy that I thought was going to be, I guess, continue to carry us into this better situation for this position from a financial standpoint. And that was Breece Hall. And there's a hell of a lot of things that have gone wrong for the Jets, but the usage, the production, the trust, the reliability of Breece Hall has to be the biggest story. And I know you're going to look to the coaching staff and the firing of Saleh, and then certainly Aaron Rodgers. You can talk about the Hassan Reddick stuff. There's a lot here. But Breece Hall might not even be the best running back on this team anymore. And that's an okay problem to have if you're looking for the kind of 1-2 punch that the Lions and the Falcons and some of these teams have been able to offer. But that's not what this offense is trying to do, right? This is still an offense that's trying to go out there and run itself through Aaron Rodgers and pump up the Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams situation. And that has shown signs, but they're losing every game. And they're not even contending from an offensive standpoint. And all signs in 2022 and 2023 were pointing to the fact that Breece Hall was going to be the linchpin of this offense, and he's just an absolute shell of himself for whatever reason. Now, he's still got 554 yards. There's still some catching involved there, though that's not his major forte. He's still one of the leaders in the league in terms of running backs out of the backfield. My point is he can still be productive, but for some reason, one or another, he's not in this offense and not with this scheme. He was a $13.5 million player coming into 2024, which says a lot because the way we do our valuations, as you probably know if you follow this, is we take recent contracts at this position and we use an algorithm to kind of find variable players that statistically fit Breece Hall. Well, if I'm doing that, I didn't have a lot of 12, 13, 14, 15, $16 million contracts to tie on to because they don't exist anymore. Okay. You're getting a franchise tag or a 5th-year option and you're getting the hell out of here with these players. So the amount of variable contracts you can use to get to $13.5 million was slim, and he still was getting there. That's how productive this player was. And it's why I had excitement for him to kind of rejuvenate things even one more step further than Barkley and Jacobs and Pollard did last offseason. Well, he's a $7.5 million player now. So this Jets offense has just absolutely torpedoed both his value and obviously his production, and to the point of where, because they do have other options on this roster and they are going to make some sweeping changes, I would imagine, this offseason, to the point of where, yes, he's an extension candidate because he's a hell of a player, because he's young, because he has shown tons of flashes of being able to carry an offense, but he might be a bigger trade candidate this March. And you can point to a bunch of teams out there that need one. There's definitely one specifically, right, that needs one. I'm not going to say because I'm not going to bring that team into this conversation, but I think that's probably where he's trending right now in week 11 of 2024 as he sets to become extension eligible for the first time this winter. So he's dropped about $6 million in value. That's insane. That doesn't happen with our algorithm. It takes a hell of a lot to do that, and he has. So that's just the nature of where things have gone. And by the way, if you're sitting here saying that's BS, right? 10 weeks of football shouldn't do that. Well, I prefaced it with, I'm running out of contracts to use as a variable. So what happens at this position specifically, and there's a couple other safeties, inside linebackers, if you, from a productivity standpoint, if you fall out of tier 1 in our math, tier 2 is way down with this position, right? So it's 16 and 15 and 14 million at the top, the big boys. If you fall out of that classification, and he has, you're down in Devin Singletary, James Conner, Chuba Hubbard, right? You're down in that world now. Ramondre Stevenson. So it's 5-6 million per year gone because you've slipped one tier inside of our algorithm. And I don't think that's incorrect because that's the nature of how contracts are working right now at this position. If you're not a unicorn, you're just going to be a player in the pool. Well, right now, that's what Breece Hall is. And I believe he still has unicorn abilities in this league, just not with his team and not with this scheme. So, yes, there's value there. No, I don't think he signs a contract with the Jets. Yes, I think he's a trade candidate. That's certainly the player at the top of this list because of all of those aspects. And I hope for better things. I hope for bluer skies in Breece Hall's future because, like I said, he was the guy carrying the candle walking into 2024 as the next big contract. And now I've got a couple other names there, but none of them really have peaked into that tier 1. They're fringe players. They're sort of, they're maybe bottom of the tier 1, but right on the edge of slipping out. And one of them specifically has had so many injury issues. I think he's just a couple of games missed away from doing that. That'd be Kenneth Walker Jr., who was drafted to be a number 1. They immediately handcuffed him right with Zach Charbonnet. So maybe they knew this was coming. They had done their homework. Maybe they were just looking for that 1-2 punch out of the gate that so many of these teams have, I think, started to adopt going forward, which is killing our fantasy teams, by the way. But this is a guy that can transcend. This is a guy that in any week can put up, 80 some yards per week. He does catch a little bit, though that's not his forte. He is kind of holding his end of the bargain. If I had to put a comp on him, and our math sort of helps me a little bit here, he's trending toward that Jonathan Taylor situation where he's a game changer. It's really hard to trust him from a reliability standpoint and a health standpoint, but he does probably do enough and show enough to warrant a splashy contract. Now, Taylor's contract went bigger than I think most of us thought it was going to be. His holdout helped. They thought they had a quarterback, right, during this contract situation with Anthony Richardson. So there was a ton of optimism quickly in Indianapolis this time last year as Jonathan Taylor was holding out. And I think the minds that be just came together and said, look, we might have something here, and we are much, much better with Jonathan Taylor running our offense. Let's just pay the guy, and he ended up getting $14 million a year, $26.5 million guaranteed. It's somewhat regrettable, even though he looks really good at times, and at other times, obviously, he can't stay on the field. That's probably where we're headed, especially if Seattle doesn't rip this Band-Aid off. Now, I don't know what the future is of Geno Smith. We talked about that a little bit last week. There's some other pieces. DK Metcalf was kind of a closet trade candidate. Tyler Lockett's probably fallen off this roster. And Jim Smith is probably there for the future. There's a couple of tight ends there. I think they've got some offensive line pieces figured out. So it's possible that Seattle decides this guy's enough. And if we have to figure out some pieces around him, that's fine. With that said, he's not a free agent. All right. This is just his first extension eligible offseason. So they could run this thing to year 4 to the expiring contract. They could certainly get him in a franchise tag situation. He's not a first round pick, so there's no fifth year option there, excuse me. So there's no rush to do this, but he's done enough to at least be in the conversation. He's on a team that you could theoretically see going run heavy over the next couple of seasons. And if that continues to be Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, then you're probably going to throw a 3-year extension at Kenneth Walker Jr., who, by the way, is only 24 years old right now. So he's checking all the boxes outside of the health stuff. So he's basically at the top of this list. It's kind of like a 1A, 1B situation between him and this next guy, Kyren Williams, who I wouldn't say he came out of nowhere, but he's definitely one of the reasons, and there's a few of them, that the Rams are not running on fumes right now. Let's put it that way. This is a guy that kind of came into our lives mid last year from a fantasy perspective and a real life perspective when the Rams were on that 7-game winning streak to finish the year and sneak in. And it looks like they're on track again. Now they played tonight. They're the Monday night game against the Dolphins. Another big win tonight, and we're going to be back in the 2023 conversation all over again. This guy's, a top 5 running back in the league when you put a bunch of things together. Okay. He's doing basically everything you're asking for him to do. Couple of fumbles this year. That's probably going to be a part of his story. Well, there's a lot of guys with that. Chuba Hubbard has 3 already this year, and he just got $8.5 million a year for 2.5 seasons. So there's a lot of that going around. Like I said, there's a lot of players in this little pool, and all of them are getting paid okay. None of them great. None of them exceptionally paid. Okay. And that's where this stands. So when we're talking Kenneth Walker and Kyren Williams, who kind of sit atop my list right now, I've got them at $10.5 million a year, which if we push this forward to a $270 million salary cap is basically a $9 million contract right now, which is what James Conner's, living on right now, and Tony Pollard's living on right now. It kind of feels right. All right. It's just sort of the next iteration of that pool carried over and cap adjusted. They're not transcending it like I thought Breece Hall might be able to do. We're not going to have a Barkley this offseason, I don't believe, but they're in the conversation for at least moving the path forward, if not continuing on the same path that we're currently on. Kyren Williams, like Kenneth Walker, not an expiring contract. He'll be heading into this final year of his rookie contract in 2025 as well. The Rams do like to extend players early, so I would put him maybe even slightly ahead of Walker Jr. or Walker III in terms of where I think who might get this done this offseason versus the other. Speaking of James Conner, he's on this list. He's a pending UFA. He's 29 years old, going on 30. He just hasn't slowed down. There's been some nicked up injury stuff here and there, but for the most part, he's been reliable. He's been exactly what they signed him to be, which is sort of a bell cow running back. He's not really flashy out of the backfield too much, but he does produce consistently week in and week out. Now, there's other options on this team. They've continued to draft this position, as everybody should be, in the middle rounds to try to find the next guy up. And in fill-in roles, those guys have looked the part. So do I think that Arizona is long for James Conner? I'd probably be leaning towards no. This is probably a player who hits free agency. And when you hit free agency at 30 years old, even though you have good pedigree, good resume, it's going to hurt you. So while I've got him just under, just basically at that 9 million mark still, that's exactly what he's earning right now. That's probably fool's gold come March 12th in free agency when teams are looking to slap on and upgrade this position. But he's certainly worth it. And it's worth getting out there right now that he has produced to that level. He has sort of transcended his age, as we've seen a couple of players do over the past couple of years here. And we'll see. He probably falls in that Raheem Mostert conversation where he's a 1B to somebody's 1A. This could be a player that joins Atlanta behind Bijan Robinson and just becomes the complementary piece. And there's a few teams out there that could utilize him in that way. So you're probably shaving off almost half of his value to do that. He's made some money. Like I said, he's 30. Most running backs are out of the league by now. He's not even close to that. So he's going to be out there. He's going to have some offers. To say he's a $9.5 million player, though, is probably fool's gold, like I said. This next guy's just as hard. All right. He is a $9.5 million player in our system. He's been in this conversation for a while, but he just can't stay on the field. That's, of course, J.K. Dobbins, who's had maybe the worst luck in the history of first-round quarterback or running backs. He's going to be a UFA because he signed a 1-year, basically, showcase deal to join the Los Angeles Chargers with Gus Edwards and Jim Harbaugh's offense. It's been great. Okay. The advanced metrics don't love him. They're never going to. He's not that full, complete 5-tool running back, but he does enough to take offenses to the next level. He's unlocked some Justin Herbert stuff, in my opinion. He's really balanced that offense out. I don't know why they'd get rid of him, is the quick answer. He's 25, so everything about that's right. He's got the injury history. It's going to happen, but it's going to happen with all these running backs. It's just the nature of the beast. So he is what he is, and I think he's done enough to warrant a multi-year extension. Is he going to get it at $9.5 million a year? Well, maybe, because of where this cap is going. Okay, so if Chuba Hubbard just got $8.3 million in the middle of 2024 on $255 cap on the worst team in football, okay, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that if the cap jumps $15 million next year and the Chargers move on from some defensive pieces, kind of build that thing through the draft, maybe go offensive heavy with some contracts, including Dobbins, that 9.5 over 3 years, right? 29 for 3 years is right within the scope of what we're talking about. Just contracts that have been signed, cap adjusted, keep the line moving forward. Not really swinging up or swinging down too much. I think he falls in line with that, especially if he can stay healthy, knock on wood, for the rest of this regular season, and they have a little postseason run, because it seems like, at least through the 9-10 weeks here, that they're going to be in the conversation in the AFC postseason. So that helps. That helps the resume. I think the team fits. I think the offense fits. I think the coach fits. And as long as the health is there, he should warrant a multi-year guarantee this time around. Najee Harris had his 5th-year option declined by the Pittsburgh Steelers. They had Jalen Warren. They had some quarterback stuff they're trying to figure out. We'll get to that maybe at the back end of this show as well. But he's been great. And again, it's this 1-2 punch we're kind of talking about. Jalen Warren's had some health stuff, so Najee's really been the guy this year. And I thought he's done a really admirable job. Is he standing out? No, he's not nearly what the first-round running back should be. And nor is he going to get paid like that. But can he go to, a different team and become a featured player in the offense? I think so. He's 26. You put him on a 3-year contract with a 2-year guarantee, and this guy's probably singing, right? Maybe that's Chicago. Maybe that's a team that just needs to balance themselves out a little bit here. Cincinnati, to some degree, even though Chase Brown has been good. There's a path forward here where this guy's still an RB1 and maybe even more so on a different franchise. I don't imagine that the Steelers extend him. They're going to have some serious defensive contracts and a quarterback situation to figure out, just to name a couple of things. So my guess is that despite him having a nice year, he's going to hit the open market. So you put him and James Conner, at least on this list, into the March free agency pool, and both are around that same price tag. But Najee's 3 years younger, so you can probably put the writing on the wall with that one. Okay, a couple more real quick, and we'll get to Dan Soemann with some baseball stuff. Brian Robinson, the Commanders are just markedly better when he's healthy. And when he misses games, and it's Austin Eckler and some patchwork stuff, Jaden Daniels does not have the balanced offense that he needs. He doesn't feel comfortable. In my opinion, this is the easiest slam dunk extension you can have out there. And I realize this started awful from a health standpoint with his unfortunate situation, but he has rounded completely into form. He's 25 years old. Washington's got value all over this roster after trading away big pieces defensively, letting some players walk in free agency, and then obviously hitting on the rookie quarterback. This is a no-brainer for me. All right, this is a no-brainer. You're probably moving on from Austin Eckler. You can bring in a cheaper RB2 to allow yourself a little bit more compensation, and then you put Robinson on basically Chuba Hubbard's contract, right? The 4 for 34, and bring him out to his age 29 season, but he's only guaranteed through age 27. This is a slam dunk for me. I think this player is undervalued even still today, and clearly you can see it when he is not active for that Washington team. That offense is just a tick under what they know they can be, especially from Jaden Daniels' perspective. I don't know if I can say that about this player. I was really hoping that this was going to be the year that Travis Etienne was unlocked, and it's just not. Okay, he continues to fall down production rankings, and his value continues to plummet. With that said, he's still a great pass catcher. Okay, he's got the 5-tool stats, and he hasn't fallen into that third tier yet in terms of our math, which would be basically $3.5 to $4 million a year, maybe on a 1-year contract. So essentially what J.K. Dobbins had to do with the Chargers, what Zeke Elliott's been having to do the past couple of off seasons, that's where that sort of third tier falls. He's still in tier 2, so he's still an $8.5, maybe a $7.5 million player. But even that sounds laughable right now, because if you've watched this Jacksonville offense, he has no impact on it. He's made some really glaring errors, and we're trying to view him based on where he was drafted, and that's just never going to add up. So he's always going to have a bit of a red mark on him with that in mind. But if you can take yourself out of that, is he that much worse than Brian Robinson or James Cook, who's next on this list? He's kind of in this Breece Hall conversation where it's just not clicking right now. For him, it hasn't clicked for 3 years. For Breece, it's just been one bad year, right? So I think we can put them all in the same kind of pool here and just understand that they're in the second tier. There are going to be teams that value him much higher. They did exercise his 5th-year option in Jacksonville, so he is fully guaranteed in 2025 at around $6.5 million. So it's not like this is going to be a situation that anybody has to rush into. It's just going to be, what's next? Are they going to make him play that out? Is he a trade candidate? It's very possible that Jacksonville, now with Trevor Lawrence's contract and a ton of defensive things to figure out, maybe floating him on the trade market to see if there's a team that wants to at least get 1 year fully guaranteed with him to figure out what he can be. Jacksonville gets a couple of picks back, and they can start to build this defense through the draft like they really need to do. I guess I'm leaning in that direction. So in our extension, our running back extension piece, we now have 2 trade candidates, and 2 good ones, two high profile players, one who's sort of busted out and one who just I think is getting jetsed. Let's put it that way. I mentioned James Cook. He has finally turned himself into the Bills running back that they really needed with Josh Allen. He's smooth. He is reliable. He's not fumbling at the goal line every other game like he did to start his career. He has certainly gained the trust of this coaching staff and of his quarterback, by the way. He's making great plays out of the backfield. He's one of the best pass blocking running backs in all of football. He always has been. It's one of the reasons he was drafted in the first place. There's a lot to like here. Now, none of his numbers are jumping off the page, despite the fact that he has career numbers right now. At least he's trending in that direction. So he just brought himself into tier 2 of our running back math. So he's at the 7.6 mark right now. But where this is headed for Buffalo, which is a very nice schedule down the stretch, a schedule that they're going to want to somewhat take the pressure off of Josh Allen with, because the AFC East is completely wrapped up already. You're probably going to see a lot of run game here with this James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, and maybe even some wide receivers getting involved here. My guess is Buffalo starts to convert to that, especially as the weather starts to turn in the East Coast here. So Cook's numbers could really pop over the next few weeks here. And not to say that he hasn't had a great year. He has. But you could see this $7.6 million rising into the nines and a halves up there with Najee and J.K. Dobbins pretty quickly because of the usage, because of obviously the success. And then, like I said, a decent postseason run from both the Bills and him specifically puts him in a really nice spot to at least go to that front office in Buffalo and say, look, I'm looking for an early extension. I think it makes sense for our position to get extended as quickly as possible. He's only 25 years old. You can see that there's a plan in place here. Now, they did draft Ray Davis. That's a player that looks like he can certainly be the next man up, but they kind of gave Cook 18 months to settle himself in the league. That seems to be something Buffalo likes to do. They're slow playing Keon Coleman a little bit. They slow play Dalton Kincaid quite a bit. Right? These are the high draft picks. If that's the plan, then you extend James Cook and you put him on a 2-year guarantee, and you slow play Ray Davis into the role, bring in some depth behind him on vet minimum contracts to make sure that the usage doesn't go crazy. And I could see that being exactly the case. So after year 3 of his rookie contract, you tack on 2 fully guaranteed years and you go from there. Javonte Williams, a player who's been up and down this valuation list. He's sort of in this James Cook conversation, and health has been a big problem for him, obviously. This Denver offense is weird, and Bo Nix is still trying to figure it out. I think the whole coaching staff is still trying to figure it out around Bo Nix. So this is easily a player I could see being in the conversation when it's all said and done. But Denver's got a lot of mouths to feed here. We'll see what happens with Sean Payton going forward, especially with that another hefty dead cap hit for Russell Wilson in 2025. Last player, Aaron Jones, Minnesota, outkicking their coverage from a team standpoint. They got another sloppy win yesterday. It's going to be the J.J. McCarthy show most likely in 2025. Aaron Jones is 29 going on 30. Signed a 1 for 7 this year with incentives. I've just got him back on a 1 for 6. Take a little bit off, build in those incentives. I don't know why he would leave this team. There's offensive firepower all over the place. You got a rookie quarterback, which should allude to the fact that you can pay a little bit of money to a running back. They may want to go and upgrade, and maybe that's through the draft, and maybe that's through one of these names we talked about here, a Najee Harris type player. But if they don't, and even if they do, Aaron Jones is a very, very, very high-end 1-2 punch player for a team that's looking to compete and looking to contend in both division and into the postseason. All right, let's talk some baseball with Dan Soemann. All right, Dan, I just went on my running back soap opera. Where are you with running backs right now? You're a big fantasy guy. Where are you with this position? Do you feel like it's kind of rounded back into form a little bit here? Because that's sort of the discussion I had before I laid out 9 or 10 valuations for where players may be headed in 2025.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's worth talking about from different angles, I guess. But from the fantasy angle, I think a lot of people are just assuming that this revitalization of the running back position is just good, positive regression on injuries mostly, right? Like the wide receivers are going down in mass, and almost all of the running backs, specifically guys you would have been drafting in the first couple of rounds from a fantasy perspective, pretty much all of those guys are healthy. And if you look across the wide receiver ranks across, from like the top 3-4 rounds, it's pretty decimated. Yeah. So I'm not my long-winded way of saying I'm going to continue to buy in to wide receivers long-term. From a fantasy perspective, despite what we've seen this year, I think next year in the fantasy market, you might start to see running backs creep up, sort of what you're hinting at. Now that differs from the real life, financials of the NFL, where we know that the wide receiver, elite wide receiver contracts are sort of dominating the market as running back stuff has fallen off. I think. I don't think that's about to change just based on what we've seen this year. Now, I do think there is some conversation about sort of carving out the elite play, what we would consider elite performers into a different bucket. And what I'm talking about is the Derrick Henrys, the Saquon Barkleys, those guys moving around. I think the fantasy market as a whole sort of overplayed that angle, as in like a lot of people that I listened to were not in on those guys switching teams, new scenario, new situation as they're aging, etc. All of those factors combined. I wasn't necessarily drafting those guys, and I'm paying the price in some instances, yeah. But
can I throw it this way though? Because I like that you brought the wide receivers into it, and we'll get to baseball here in a second, I promise. The conversation, I guess, for the past few years now is not just should you pay a wide receiver, but should you pay two? Right? There's been now more than a few teams that have one top tier, maybe two top tier, one top tier, one B tier paid wide receivers, and injuries aside, and they're everywhere. For the most part, those teams are still able to exist in terms of contention and playoffs and all that. So it seems like that position is not slowing down, but I think we're also starting to see teams buy in on paying two running backs. Do you kind of agree with that? I mean, what the Lions are doing here seems to make sense to me. I don't think there's any reason why they wouldn't pay Gibbs and Montgomery at the same time right now. They've already paid Montgomery now to his second extension. I think that's going to be the model, right? If one running back that you have isn't in that top tier, and I talked about it in the open here, Dan, too, right? There's still this unicorn bucket that you mentioned, which is the Barkleys and the McCaffreys and even to some degree Kamara with his extension. But then if you fall out of that bucket, you're down into like the 7.5, $8.5 million per year mark, right? It's like it's almost a 200% drop off from tier 1 to tier 2 in the running backs. Well, if you don't have a tier 1 player, right? If you don't have a player that you know is going to be worth 14 to 16 million a year right now, then it mathematically, right? It makes sense that you can just pay two tier 2 players at 8 million a year and probably get 3 times the production out of it because you've got usage and health and all that on your side at that point in time. So I actually think that's where we're headed. It used to be just give me a guy at 7 million and I'll backload it with vet minimum contracts or 4th round draft picks. And I'm not sure that's holding up anymore. Some teams are able to do that, but I have a feeling we're going to see teams with 2 $7 million running backs, with 2 $8 million running backs. And maybe that's the next iteration of this, right? That maybe that's where, so the pendulum swung way up for a while there with Adrian Peterson and then McCaffrey and all those guys. And then it swung way down where we had like 2 straight free agent classes making like $3 million contracts across the board. And maybe now it's just corrected itself. And we're going to balance out that, 9% of the cap is a great spot to have not just one, but 2 of these players. And I think that sort of aligns with the fantasy approach, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I think we could just call it playmakers instead of like necessarily like trying to pigeonhole specific positions, because we've seen teams like the Eagles, like the Niners pay multiple high end, just like playmakers.
Gadgets.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Eagles now have Barkley in addition to AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, who are both on extensions, if I'm not mistaken, as well as Dallas Goedert. So there, like we've seen these teams just say, we're going to commit to adding offensive playmakers. We'll put 1 or 2 studs in on defense, and we'll fill in the blanks around the rest of the roster. Right. So in general, I think, that's what you're kind of trying to do in a fantasy team too. You're trying to get a couple anchors with your first couple rounds, and then you're just trying to hit sort of catch lightning in a bottle with the rest of with your later picks. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
All right, lay it on me. Let's get to some baseball stuff. There's some news from the weekend. It's funny because I think Friday before we kind of shut down business, we talked about this guy. And I wasn't under the impression that there was going to be a situation where he was coming to the Major League Baseball this year because of age and some of the things you're going to get into. But lay the latest international prospect on us and give us your thoughts on where this might be headed, Dan.
Yeah, so Mike's talking about Roki Sasaki, who is a right-handed pitcher from Japan. people listening to this might have learned about him with the previous World Baseball Classic. He kind of jumped onto the spotlight there, although he has been scouted in baseball circles since he was a teenager. He is he's widely considered probably one of the top 5 pitching arms in the world currently, which I know is probably...
I read that too. That's something. That is a statement. For
sure. I mean, if you look at his... I mean, I was going to get into this a little bit later, but he basically throws 3 pitches: fastball, splitter, slider. His fastball sits, not touches, sits at over 100 miles an hour. I think in the WBC, he threw... In the semifinal game, he threw 29 pitches, and I believe 26 of those were clocked at 100 miles an hour or over. And if I read correctly, only 4 pitchers in the history of pitch tracking have touched that, and comps were have thrown that many pitches at that velocity in a single game. And the comps were like Jacob deGrom, Nate Eovaldi, guys like that, right? So we're talking about a really elite arm, and he's only 23 years old, which will come into play for a couple of reasons as we kind of dig into the financials here. But I mean, basically, I saw a really good comp. This is a picture of Jacob deGrom's potential with Paul Skeen's age. So, I mean, this is really a bona fide elite number 1 starter for any it could be for any major league club theoretically, as we kind of talk through this here. So,
all right, let's stick with him, and then we'll talk about the semantics of how he actually gets himself onto a baseball team in America. It's the innings that we're worried about, right? And that's always the case with these Japanese players. I think I'm reading here correctly. 18 starts, 111 innings, right? So it's just, it's a half a season for what he would eventually be asked to be in Major League Baseball as a full-time starting pitcher. You mentioned the 3 pitches. You mentioned the velocity. I'm going to ask you this question, and I know it's off the top of my head, so I apologize. Why isn't this guy just going to be a 9th inning player to start his career in Major League Baseball?
I guess I don't have the scouting report to speak fluently on that, but I mean, pretty much because he doesn't need to be. He's set up. He's been developed thus far as a starter. I know what you're trying to get at with the Japanese stuff. It's just a different game over there, and I doubt that the utilization would mirror how it would be once he crosses over to the States. Now, that being said, I mean, there is a little we've seen Japanese pitchers come over here, Senga, even
Yamamoto.
Yamamoto faced some injury concerns, plus just the transition hurdles. So I'm not saying that he's going to walk over here and immediately win a Cy Young, although he could do that. I'm just simply saying, this is a 23-year-old pitcher with all of the tools to become one of, if not the best pitcher in MLB within the next 3 years, pretty safely. So, but yeah, I think if he's going to reach his ceiling, he's going to be a starting pitcher. So I mean, could a team utilize him to get him onto the roster sooner as they develop him? Sure. But I would be a bit skeptical. That's kind of the case that the role that they take. So,
all right, tell me why this player is not going to come close to Yamamoto's $325 million contract with the Dodgers from last season.
Yeah. So, foreign-born players, excluding Canada or Puerto Rico, those guys are draft eligible. Foreign-born players typically come into Major League Baseball in one of 2 ways. Now, I say primarily because there are a number of one-off extenuating circumstances that we won't get into on this podcast, but basically one of 2 ways. Either an international amateur, which is a player once they turn 16 years old, or will be 16 at the time of the signing bonus or of the beginning of the signing bonus period. Those players can sign with a major league team, but they are bonus pool eligible. So they say, until they would reach essentially 24 years old. So basically these are all the 16, 17, 18-year-olds that get signed. Now the period starts January 1st. So once those players I won't get into explaining the bonus pool thing. I think we've covered that a little bit here, but I'm sure I'll touch on it a little bit later.
But just to jump in, it basically evens the playing field here, essentially, right? The Dodgers can't just come swinging with $250 million and say, we're the best team with the best offer. You're going to sign with us. They essentially goes through the bonus pool draft, essentially, right? Like every team can throw some sort of bonus pool offer at this player, and that comes with a posting fee as well for the Japanese team. But this isn't going to be a contract offer situation. This is simply going through the pool system, which levels the playing field greatly, right? All 30 teams are going to be in on this, at least to start.
Exactly. So the difference between Yamamoto last year entered at 25, and he had his 6 years of foreign in a foreign league. So he was exempt from the bonus pool, which led to that 12 for 235 with the Dodgers, right? Yep. So Sasaki is going to come at 23 and he's going to enter at 23 years old. Now, he would have qualified next year in November of 2025 for the 2026 offseason. He would have qualified, but because of the COVID season, he wouldn't have reached his 6 years in a foreign league. So he would have had to wait to post to go the Yamamoto route until 2026. So that's the big difference here, is basically the age plus the years of foreign professional experience dictates whether you fall into Group A or Group B. And Group B is significantly more lucrative than Group A, right?
So he's going to come over at 23, and he's going to fall right into the Major League Baseball team control structure, right? Like Ohtani did. And there's
Correct.
6 full seasons of team control.
Correct. So that's so bringing Ohtani into this. Ohtani is going to mirror Sasaki is going to mirror the Ohtani situation, as in Ohtani could have waited another 2 years. He came over in 2018 at 23 years old. He could have waited another 2 seasons and come over. There's a number of reasons why he didn't. We won't really get into those because it's really very layered. But so he's another one who technically could have just waited and signed a more lucrative contract. At the time, Ohtani was projected to be if he would have waited, he was projected to probably be in the $200 million range. Whereas he fell into this first international amateur process, and he only signed for 2.3. A little over 2.3 million at that. And
that's about what we're going to see here too, right? I know the Dodgers have about 2.5 a bonus pool. That's obviously the team to watch here, and the Mets are involved here too. Every team's involved, but that's about what we're dealing with here, right? It's about a $2.5 million signing bonus and then 6 years of team control.
Exactly. It's going to be pretty low, and I'll try and I'll attempt to break down kind of the variables with that in a minute here, but so just to talk let me just lay out the differences. Ohtani versus Yamamoto, right? Ohtani was an international amateur. Yamamoto was what we consider a foreign professional. Ohtani, he got this $2.3 million signing bonus, massive value, right? Which is what Sasaki is going to get. So if we're going with the projection that Ohtani would have signed for around 200 mil if he had just waited, he signed the signing bonus. His pre-arb was about 1.8 mil. His arb years were 38.5 mil. So he earned about 42.8 mil across his first 6 seasons, which comparatively he could have earned a 200 million. We don't know the term on that, but you get kind of where I'm going with this. So this is just simply to say he left a bunch of like base value salary on the table in order to come over here earlier. Obviously that worked out.
It worked out. Yeah. He's okay.
Yeah. It obviously worked out for Ohtani, but just to kind of point out the potential money that could be being left on the table here. Now, the second variable to the Sasaki stuff is, since he is an international amateur and the offseason basically begins towards the end of last year's signing period. So what do I mean by that? The new signing period since COVID starts January 1st. The 2024 period started January 15th of 2024. It will end on December 15th of 2024. Now, there's a 30-day period. The next period would start January 15th of 2025. Why am I explaining that? Well, the bonus pools for each season are obviously going to be different, and when he gets posted is going to have a big determination, not so much on how much he makes, but where he could go. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, if he gets posted in 2025, January 15th of 2025, basically there's more teams that come into play because they can trade for additional bonus pool money, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the 2024 data is largely already in stone. So what Mike had said, what Mike had just hinted at there, the Dodgers currently for this signing period ending in December 15th of 2024, the Dodgers currently lead the way in terms of financial capital. So they would be the current favorites. I believe the Orioles could trade teams can trade for, I believe it's up to 60% of their original bonus pool, which is like a very shifting scale based on what their original amount was. But so it sounds like the Orioles could theoretically bring the most, gunpowder to the fight, if you will. But that they haven't made those trades yet. I would assume they would only make trades to try and get there if they thought that they could legitimately sign him instead of the.
So it looks like, Dan, for 2025, which I have a feeling that's when this is going to happen, is in the January window and not immediately. It looks like teams are going to have between $5 and $7.5 million of bonus allotment in that January window. Is this a player, Dan, that a team like the Orioles would just burn their entire allotment on? Is he that type of superstar, especially for a team like Baltimore, who's kind of fringe contending here?
Admittedly, I'm going to speculate on this because I defer to like somebody like more in tune, like with front offices and their. What I'm trying to say is I have trouble believing that these teams that are super involved in the international market and have been scouting some of these players for a half a decade at this point, like 16-year-olds are literally getting scouted when they're 10, 11, 12 years old overseas, right? So I have and plans have been put in place for multiple years. They've been planning on this, structuring financially. I was thinking about this. I have trouble getting to a point where these teams that are massively involved in the international market would simply blow up everything they've already done to just give him their full allotment. So that being said, there are teams that will probably not, teams would sacrifice certain guys, but I don't know if he's just going to get the 7.1 of bonus pool money from any one team, if that's what you're trying. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
It is. I think I don't think it's the craziest idea in the world, but I understand what you're saying. There's too much other value to be found here in this international pool. I mean, you're finding 1 to 2 players per signing period that end up in at least in your AAA system, if not on your Major League Baseball team within 3 to 5 years. Because most of these players have professional experience, which is just something you're not getting from the American draft process and things like that, right? So it's kind of a fancier way for contending teams to drop a player in and get immediate value out of them. But Dan, if this is a starting pitcher, a top of the rotation starting pitcher that you might have 6 years of team control on, and you're a pitcher away, which by the way, Baltimore might be, that might be the perfect team to have this conversation about. It's worth a $7 million allotment. It really is. It might be the one thing you need to move into that AL East division with authority. So I could see it happening with a player like this, especially with the age. That's the other thing. I mean, we could probably finish on this. Just do the math. This guy just turned 23 November 3rd. I think I just read last week. 6 years. He's going to be 28 going on 29 hitting free agency for the first time. This is it. This could be a $600 million player right here. Right. Maybe the highest paid pitcher in the history of baseball. if he tracks exactly as he sounds. And for the most part, the kids that have come over with this kind of, gravitas have hit. Now, they haven't remained healthy, but no pitcher remains healthy in baseball anymore. So this is just kind of par for the course. But there's legitimate excitement because of kind of all the reasons we have with Juan Soto, right? It's production, resume, and age all at the same time coming together. Well, that's what this kid is, except for there's a draft allotment cap on him, right? So all you have to do is outbid and out kind of dazzle, which the Dodgers are certainly going to be able to do, any other team in baseball to get this kid in for the next 6 seasons. It's a sneaky good get. It's the name that we didn't think was going to hit because of all the reasons you laid out. It was just beneficial for him to wait, but waiting 2 years and being 25 probably doesn't make sense because now you're a 31-year-old free agent when it's all said and done. So I get why he's doing it. I imagine you believe the Dodgers are heavy favorites here, right?
For sure. Just to finish off your previous point there, I saw that he asked to be posted last year and his team turned it down. And I think it was in the Athletic article with Britt Giraldi that she spent time in Japan, and Gregory Polanco plays with him. And basically Sasaki has been asking Polanco everything. He's been picking his brain about the majors and saying, I'm going to go there. He is eager to come over here. So what I'm trying to say is that the real last question is why now, if you're going to forfeit money? It sounds to me like a big chunk of this is just he's ready and he wants to come prove himself and he doesn't give a damn about maxing out the money. So why is that important now? The Dodgers are obviously the favorites for a number of reasons. They have the most pool allotment, plus the Ohtani draw, plus the competitiveness, etc. It's rumored that he wants a team with a strong development system because he doesn't feel like a finished product. So that's where other teams come into play. Like maybe the Orioles, who have a stockpile, who could get there with the bonus pool space, have a good developmental program. I think
Tampa's at the top of this list. Tampa's got to be there.
Maybe I've seen Homer here, but I've seen the Guardians mentioned as if it gets to 2025 that they could really stockpile and make the trades to kind of get where they need to go. So yeah, the Dodgers are the obvious favorites. The reason I pointed out before that, other teams might get in. Well, I guess I'm not even going to go down that road because it's going to complicate things. The Dodgers are pretty simply the favorites here. There's some other teams that could get involved, but I mean, from a marketing standpoint too, are you going to beat the Dodgers plus Ohtani? You're going to have a compounding factor there, I would assume. So
okay, so let's finish with this statement. It's a fill in the blank statement. If the Dodgers win the Sasaki draft and sign Juan Soto, blank.
R.I.P. No, I don't know. I mean, anything happens, it's baseball, but man.
Can I put it this way? Because I've been involved now, over the past almost 2 decades with a bunch of these sports where one singular thing has forced an actual change to the game, right? It's like a CBA change to the game. I'm kind of thinking Warriors recently with basketball and how they literally had to change the tax structures to make sure that the 2017 Warriors could never happen again. And I think they were successful in doing so, even though there's plenty of blood shed since. Do you think that would be the backbreaker? Do you think something significant would change and be put in Theo Epstein's lap to ensure that one team couldn't get to that level? Because I do think that would be a significant David and Goliath situation.
I think it would I'm not saying yes or no to that. I think baseball does like this to some degree. Maybe it's going to get out of hand here in the next few years, but excuse me, I think it would be the deferred money stuff. There would have to be some language for limitations on deferred money, because that's where you're really getting into funny money. I mean, I'm not going to cry poor for any of these teams in any market. They're all doing just fine, but that's where the real divide the financial wage gap, if you will, comes in, is when when the Dodgers can just push all this money, hundreds of millions of dollars, literally kick it down the road a decade. I mean, the Tampa Bays, the Pittsburghs, they're never going to be able to compete with that. So I would have to say that there would be that's the easiest loophole to close without opening up a whole other can of worms. But
okay.
Yeah, I kind of love this. I just love this period that he's coming over now. And theoretically, even if it is just the Dodgers that sign him, theoretically, it's an even playing field for any team who wants
that's right.
To get involved. And he's talking the talk. He's not just saying, get me the most money. He's at least entertaining the fact that I'll go anywhere, that theoretically. But
also, any agent with a brain who's in his ear is saying what I just said, which is the sooner you get here, the quicker we're going to get to that $400 million when you're age appropriate, 28, 29 years old. That just doesn't happen in Major League Baseball. So you're already ahead of the game just by walking in the door this winter. So it's a good spot for him as long as he can produce. Is there anything about this bonus pool structure that you don't like now that you've done so much work on it over the past couple of years?
Honestly, I think they've done a pretty decent job of, the whole concept of us signing 16-year-olds and scouting them at 10. I mean, that is a lot of, I'm not commenting on that because that is greasy in a number of ways. I'm just saying, I think they've done a pretty solid job. That was going to be my final point here. Somebody listening is like, well, I mean, with the draft and all this, luxury tax, you can just pay the tax and get out of any issues. There is no way to get around this anymore, right? When the Braves had their issues a number of years ago, they suffered massive penalties, and thank God they got Alex Anthopoulos because he was able to kind of cross the bridge there and get them back into relevance. But that was theoretically something that should have crippled an organization for a decade. Some of the penalties they faced and the ripple effect that could have come from that. But I mean, so my point is there's no way to get around this bonus pool structure, and the Dodgers can't just say, we don't care about the bonus pool thresholds or limits or anything like that, and we'll just pay to get there. This is the great equalizer in baseball, if you will, is all teams have an equal shot theoretically to get this guy.
Should it be tied to success at all, like the draft is? So if you're the best team in baseball, you're going to have the worst draft pick, and that's kind of the same for most sports, right? But there's really no variance with the draft pools. It's just a separate accounting that you can manage kind of on the side with trades and all sorts of stuff, right? You can acquire bonus pool kind of separately from everything else that goes on with your day-to-day business. Should the best team in baseball have a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to the next window of international draft signing, I guess?
Indirectly, they do. It's not direct. I'll admit that. Indirectly, they do, though, because the bonus pool, the original bonus pool, is assigned with competitive. If you have a competitive balance pick, round A, round B in the draft, you get more money internationally. And so in theory, the smaller markets get a bigger upfront international pool. The larger markets, quote, the higher spenders, the Dodgers, etc., they get a lower initial pool. Also, depending on if you sign premium free agents, that will take away from your pool. So premium spenders like the Dodgers, again, who have, the Rangers who spent on Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, those guys, they got detracted from their international bonus pool because of that. So indirectly, it is set up like that a little bit, which, I mean, not to take a side jab at the previous regime of the Orioles, but that's why it was so damn puzzling that the Orioles never got involved in the international market, was because they got, in theory, one of the bigger chunks of money every year, and they just traded it away in player state. But I'm going on a tangent. Nonetheless, the system is indirectly set up to give a little bit of a priority to the smaller market teams. But again, we're talking a window of five, or anywhere currently from $5 to $7 million, where the bigger pools are 7 mil, the lower pools are 5 mil, and you might get a couple different guys, but you're not really differentiating in a massive way there. But it naturally is set up a little bit like that.
Good stuff, man. We'll probably be back next week with the latest Major League Baseball update. This was a good one, though. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.